Welcome to today's webinar. My name's Jo Welch. I'm a senior career practitioner at Complete Careers. So just to kind of introduce me, give you a little bit more context around me and my background. As I said, I'm a senior career practitioner with Complete Careers. I've been with them for a couple of years now. I'm a level 6 qualified guidance professional with a master's in career development. I'm also an experienced career mark assessor, so I've done my fair share of kind of first time assessments and revalidation assessments with schools. I've also got about 20 years of experience working with schools and colleges. I have quite a strong background in widening participation. So I spent quite a few years with Aim Higher, Nottinghamshire. So any of you old enough to remember the Aim Higher programme, kind of that's where it all started for me. So today we're going to be looking at, as you know, Standard I. So that's the information standard, which is obviously within the quality and career standards, using the career mark approach. So Standard I is the smallest of all the standards. So we have got an hour today, but we probably won't need it. And as we said, as Peter said earlier, please do feel free to ask lots of questions, pop them in the chat box, and Peter will, if I miss them, which hopefully I won't, I'm sure Peter will flag them up, or we can just have a bit of a discussion at the end. Okay, so hopefully by the end of today, or by the end of the webinar, you will be able to identify the purpose of Standard I, understand the relevance of each of the assessment indicators within the standard, have a good understanding of the relationship between the assessment indicators and the Gatsby framework, identify examples of evidence to meet Standard I, and also just quickly considered things like, interactions with the workplace, and kind of how they can impact and how they play a role in achieving Standard I. So, okay, so let's look at the standard, kind of look at the nitty-gritties of the standard. So basically, Standard I is all about how your organisation provides career-related information. So the way in which you provide your career-related information obviously is going to differ depending on your target audience. So who are you sharing that and targeting that information at? So it'll differ depending on whether you're providing the information for students or learners. They're the same thing, students or staff, parents, carers, or other stakeholders like employers. So what we're going to do as part of this session is look at kind of what constitutes good information and resources, and identify lots of examples of evidence that you can provide in order to meet the Standard I. And as I said, we're going to look at the assessment indicators for Standard I. So as I said before, there's only 2 of those. You've got assessment indicator 1 is looking at systems, content and processes, and then assessment indicator 2 is looking at the accessibility of and competence to use resources. Okay, so let's look at each one of those assessment indicators individually. Let's break them both down and kind of just look at the evidence, the examples of evidence that you could use to meet each assessment indicator. So looking at number 1, so assessment indicator 1 is all about systems, content and processes. So in relation to your career information, it's about thinking about the kind of the what, the how and the who. So the what would be, what information do you provide to support effective career planning and decision making? And then how do you ensure that these information sources meet the needs of individual learners and cohorts by being relevant, accurate, impartial, of course, aspirational, and non-stereotypical. And then the who is all about who manages the process of providing your career-related information. So who is responsible for the kind of, the ongoing maintenance, development, monitoring, that sort of thing. Okay, so firstly then, let's take a little bit of a look at the what. So what information, let's look at the content. What information is it that you provide to support effective career decision making, progression and transition? So I've already mentioned then, obviously this information is going to differ depending on your audience. So on the slide, I've just taken a first example. So I've identified some examples of what we will be expecting to see you provide in terms of career-related information. And I've started there with an example, for example, for learners, to help with decision making and in terms of transition onto their next steps, onto the next stage in education. You would definitely want to include good information around post 14, 16 and 18 pathways. So this is about making sure that every pathway is represented, and that there isn't like loads of information about A levels, for example, and very little information about T levels or apprenticeships. Also your learners might be very interested in finding out about case studies, that case studies about former alumni, former students in the school can provide really good career related information by highlighting, pathways that previous students have followed. If you're going to do this, just try to have a case study that provides an example of, each of the routes. So an academic example, a vocational example, and a work-based example, so that you're making sure that all of the different pathways and routes are being represented. So, things like case studies of former, of alumni can be really, really helpful in terms of like addressing things like perhaps stereotyping, for example, kind of maybe highlighting a female student who's gone into, the field of engineering. We know at the moment only 1 in 8 engineering jobs in the UK are filled by females, which despite, girls into engineering and women in STEM and all the sort of initiatives that have been going on for absolutely years and years and years, we still only have 1 in 8 jobs in engineering are filled by females. So you might want to use like a case study of an alumni. It doesn't have to be an alumni, it can be anybody, it can be, aspirational women in engineering, but case studies to highlight these pathways. So, those are just a couple of examples of information, career-related information that you can make sure direct in the direction of learners. Parents. So parents, the information that you provide for parents is going to be slightly different. Well, is going to be different in that they will need to have that post-16 pathways information on all the stuff that I've already highlighted, but also you need to provide parents, in fact, all users really, all sort of stakeholders, with access to your career leader contact details. So your career leader contact details should be on your website, and this is on the statutory guidance for schools that you need to display those. But parents might also be interested in things like your CEIAG policy. That as a minimum, that's kind of the sort of minimum information that we would expect to see on the website in terms of kind of meeting your statutory obligations. But schools go over and above and make really great use of things like newsletters, e-bulletins. They're really good at sharing their careers program. with parents and students so that they know what's coming up every year, so they know the activities that are planned, the sort of career related activities that they're going to be getting involved in during the year. So sharing things like that, we would like to see you doing that actively. So signposting parents as well. This isn't just parents, but it's a really helpful for parents to flag up kind of trusted sources of information. So, making sure that, for example, your website has lots of links to quality external sources of information. And I've put a couple up on the slide, but ones that I know that schools use on a regular basis in terms of signposting for students and also parents. The National Careers Service is a really good one because it has lots of information about different jobs, but it also has tools on there like self-assessment tools and things like that students can use. And other websites like BBC Bite Size Careers, Career Pilots, I Could, UCAS, Prospects, all of these really good trusted sources of information, because we know that there is a lot out there. There's tons of career related information online, and some of it is really good and some of it is not so great. So it's about directing your parents to really trusted sources of information that are going to be accurate, reliable, up to date. And then there is information that you need to share as part of your statutory guidance. Another piece of information is your access policy. So your access policy for further education colleges and training providers under what we know as the Baker Clause, to make sure that you're meeting your statutory obligations in terms of giving external training providers access to your learners. And then finally, there needs to be career-related information shared with staff, so that everybody is familiar with, for example, your school's policy on CEIAG, perhaps the CEIAG development plan, any sort of like training resources, any sort of CPD training resources that you use, and then other information that could be useful, like career, like if you have some career champions, you have like faculty within each faculty, you might have a career champion, and share that information with other faculties within the school so that everybody can share information, share best practice, and learn from each other. So all of these things are going to help you meet the Gatsby benchmarks. They all are going to contribute to all of the Gatsby benchmarks, even benchmark 1, sort of having a stable careers plan, but particularly things like benchmark 2, which is all about providing information. It's all about ensuring that all of your stakeholders have access to labour market information, so that they know what all the options are in terms of progression and transition. Okay, so in terms of the platforms, the appropriate platforms to use for providing your career-related information, the school website is an obvious choice because of ease of access for the majority of groups. But obviously, we can't assume that all learners and their families have access to the internet. So it's really important to support your your school website with physical platforms. So physical platforms in school, like that's things like notice boards, displays. I've even seen some great like wall graphics that schools have used. Is creative as you like with vibrant displays on notice boards or in your library or your learning resource centre. And if you can't show us these these places in person because your assessment is happening remotely, then take some really good screenshots or photographs. You know, those will suffice if we're not going into school and you can't physically show us, then just make sure that there's some really good photographs, screenshots of the website and things like that. So let's move on to how. So this is moving on to the how. So in terms of the systems and processes, this is, you know, how do you provide an appropriate range of career-related information for each cohort that is accurate, impartial, up-to-date, comprehensive and non-stereotypical? So many schools make use of digital learning platforms like Kudos, Unifrog, Start Profile, Launchpad. There's, you know, lots of different ones to choose from. So, and these do provide really excellent sources of information. Um, these sorts of platforms and the resources they contain, because they often have a lot of resources within these digital platforms you can download and use, you know, in the classroom. They can be used in conjunction with PHSE lessons or during tutor time. They can be built into lesson plans and schemes of work so that you can demonstrate a structured approach to career learning. So that's going to be really helpful with, you know, you're putting together your evidence so we can see that, you know, these platforms are being, you know, are being utilized, they're being monitored, the students know how to use them, they're being incorporated within career learning in a structured way. And that's really important because these digital platforms are often very expensive unless you're lucky enough to have them funded by you know, your local LEP or careers hub. So you need to make sure that they, you know, that investment is helping you achieve the intended outcomes. You know, otherwise it's a kind of bit of waste of time and money. And I've already mentioned that, you know, obviously the school website is a great, a perfect vehicle for information giving, and it can be used for all the things that I've already mentioned, newsletters, etc., etc. But you can use it to flag up news items, you can use it to flag up upcoming trips, you can use it to, you know, flag up parent surveys that you want, you know, like parents to complete. Um, just always make sure that it's kept fresh and up to date so that parents don't just think, oh, well, what's the point? Because they never put anything different on there. You know, they want it to be up to date, they want it to be really, really useful. So just make sure that that's kind of kept on top of. And that's going to provide a perfect segue into the who. So the who is all about thinking about who is responsible for managing all of your career related information. So the operational part of this role often falls into the remit of somebody like the librarian or your learning resource centre manager, or perhaps people like your faculty career champions, or your careers administrator if your organisation is lucky enough to have one of those. But overall, it's the responsibility of the careers leader to have the strategic overview of all career related resources to ensure that the necessary maintenance and development of your resources, and to quality assure all resources and monitor their usage. You know, that's sort of within the career leader's remit to make sure all of those things happen. And of course, you can highlight that all of these things are happening within your CEIAG development plan, within your CEIAG policy, to demonstrate that, you know, you've got formal links between departments and that the different faculties within your or within your organisation are making use of this information, and somebody has overall responsibility for maintaining it, developing it and monitoring it, which, as I said, that person would usually be the careers leader, who would have that kind of strategic overview of implementing all of these things. So let's move on to indicator 2, which is the accessibility of and competence to use resources. So let's just look at accessibility first. So the sorts of things that you need to sort of take into consideration when you're addressing this indicator is, do your learners know how to locate the sources of information they need? Do they know how to locate them? That's really, really important. Do they know when they can locate? So when are they able to access resources? Are there specific times in the day, in the timetable, or periods, or less, subjects? PHSE is obviously an obvious one, but when are they allowed to access resources? You might have a specific time in the day where your learners are able to access resources in the library if they're wanting to access physical resources. So it's all about kind of making sure your learners know how to access the information resources, when they can access them, and where they're going to be. So we've already talked about the website and digital learning platforms and things like that in terms of the content, but this is more about kind of how can they actually get access, making sure that they've got really good access. So is the information provided, for example, in appropriate range of formats to cater for the needs of all students? So this is something you could consider within your portfolio of evidence. You could maybe consider highlighting examples of differentiated resources for students with special educational needs and disabilities, for example, to highlight the fact that you are thinking about your information resources for many different cohorts of learners, so that this again will contribute to Gatsby benchmark number 3, which is all about meeting the needs of individual learners. So this has a little bit of overlap there. It's not just all about Gatsby 2, which we talked about earlier, but things like this will also fall into benchmark 3 as well. And then also thinking about things like, how do you organise and classify your physical resources so that learners know, where to find, say, resources about, they might want to access resources about all the further education colleges within your locality. So, do they know about how to access those resources? They know how to Google colleges online, but do they know where to find those resources if they want to pop into the library, to have a bit of a look at some of sort of physical brochures from college and universities? So moving on to competence to use resources. So competence to use resources is not just about say, doing an assembly to launch a digital learning platform, for example. It's about feeling confident that learners are supported to initially access, but also continue to access resources, whether they're physical, digital, or human. So I've carried out, for example, just to give you an example of this, I've carried out assessments, quality and career standards assessment in schools who have invested a lot of money in digital learning platforms. Yet when I ask the learners about that platform on the day of the assessment, when I see them in the focus groups, I've actually had it where not one single student knew what that learning platform was. Like if I asked them about, I can't remember which one it was, say it was Kudos, asked them about Kudos, they actually didn't know what Kudos was, that yet the school was investing a lot of money in that. And they hadn't really been given, they weren't competent to use the resource, they weren't aware of it, first of all. But if they're not aware of it, they're not going to be competent to use it. Now, some learners are, they are aware of a digital learning platform, but actually they're not competent to use it because they don't know what their password is, for example. So it's not just about presenting the learners with a platform and saying, right, here's a platform to use. It's about reminding them and making sure that they have the competence to use it. And this is another example of where, schemes of work and lesson plans can be used to demonstrate, a structured approach to career learning and provide support for learners to ensure continued competence to use resources of all kinds. So in PHSE or any other lessons, it's about trying to integrate these resources into those lessons so that you are making use of them and the learners are becoming, competent users of resources. So consider your strategy also for making parents and carers aware of all resources. So do your parents and carers, are they able and competent to use resources? Do they know where to find them? Do they know what they are? Are they made aware of them? You know, it's about perhaps periodically reviewing that strategy, and making sure that those strategies and systems and procedures are in place so that parents and carers can be competent users of information. And in terms of staff, it's about asking whether staff have any existing CPD needs in terms of career related information. Do staff know what's available and where to find it so that they can almost begin to build their own toolbox of resources? And so that you're able to identify any sort of training needs that staff might have in relation to career related information and fill those kind of knowledge gaps that exist if they do exist. So I realise that's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of Standard I and the two indicators. But before we move on to interactions with the workplace that we're going to look at briefly as well, does anyone have any questions about what we've sort of covered so far? Anyone have any questions about Standard I? Anyone have any questions about pieces of evidence that you could use, or either of the assessment indicators before we move on? Oh, I think there might be a chat popped in at 4:30ish. Oh, sorry, this is from Janet. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? I don't think we've got any chat questions from anybody at the moment. So I think we're just going to move on to then the looking at work interactions with the workplace and kind of how they can sort of impact on career related information and resources. So I'm going to try and get my screen to move on to the next slide. Okay, so this has been tricky actually, very tricky during COVID-19 to carry on with interactions with the workplace, but people and organisations are coming up with some really fantastic ways in which interactions with the workplace can continue to be offered to learners. And of course, interactions with the workplace, interactions with employers do form a really important part of the way in which you provide career related information to your learners. And now more than ever, it's important to continue those, keep those channels of information open. Of course, it's important that you quality assure any aspects of your CIAD provision, by continually reviewing, monitoring and evaluating for continuous improvement. And of course, this also applies to career-related information gained through interactions with the workplace. So I've included on the slide a few examples of good quality providers of virtual work experience. And, we know that these are good quality because they have received good feedback from students. Schools consider them to be trusted providers of resources, and you know, they're forging ahead with sort of developing more and more opportunities for virtual opportunities for schools. So if anyone's come across, I mean, these are three pretty well-known ones, but if anyone's come across any other great examples of providers of virtual work experience, then maybe they'd like to share those at the end. You know, sharing best practice is what we're all about, and people are always making new networks, new contacts. So growing their banks of information. So that'd be really great to kind of share that information at the end, if anyone has any really good examples of things they've come across. So, you know, things like the National Careers Week, that is nearly upon us. And that is a fantastic opportunity to highlight these types of experiences to learners, parents, and carers. Um, Now, the National Careers Week is supported by some really great online resources that can be downloaded from the National Careers Week website, which I've got on the next slide. So things like the Future of Work Guide is a really great resource for Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 students. It draws attention to things like the fourth industrial revolution. It has little links to videos and things like that. So it's a fully interactive resource. Um, it talks about the fourth industrial revolution. It highlights key skills needed for future jobs. It's a really good read. It's packed full of really good information, and as I said, it's very applicable for Key Stage 4 and 5, and of course parents. But the parents also get a guide. The Parents Guide to Careers for National Careers Week is also a really good resource and downloadable from the website. I'll just show you actually what the guides look like so you know what you're looking for. And you know, these are really good examples of kind of really good quality information that can support your career related resources, and support, you know, other things that you're doing in school. You know, you can post these to the website. You can make sure that parents, you know, send out an alert for parents and parents and carers that these guides are there and ready to use, and they, you know, they can really sort of help support your program. So I don't want to waffle on too long. So that's kind of more or less it from me. I'd just like to see if anybody's got any comment, even if it's just like comments and observations, or, you know, perhaps things that they've come across, really great sources of career information, or perhaps anything that they're struggling with if you're trying to gather evidence at the moment for your quality and career mark assessment. If you've got any questions about relating to information, or just general questions actually about that, you know, I'm really happy to take any questions from you. So that's kind of it. Open to you guys.